the conservation of fresco paintings in the Church of St. Leontius in the village of Vodocha. A new method of dismantling fresco paintings. An important place of cultural interest in the Socialist Republic of Macedonia is the Church of St. Leontius in the monastery at Vodocha. It lies at the foot of the Belasica mountain on the left bank of the river Vodočica, very close to the village of Vodocha, which derives its name from the river. This place is supposed to have had some connection with the blinding of 15,000 soldiers of Samuel's army by the Byzantine Emperor Basil II in 1014. The word Vodocha suggests taking out of eyes. From the very first explorations, the monastery was considered to have been the seat of the Strumica episcopacy. There are no historical data about when the monastery was built, but certain archaeological discoveries, the architecture and the paintings seem to indicate chronological continuity in the building of certain of its complexes. The church is a complex of buildings built in a number of phases. Its oldest part is considered to be the eastern semicircular apse, onto the inner side of which the apse of the eastern church was later built. The basilica was pulled down when a church in the shape of a cross with 3 apses was built on its western side. Judging by the remains of the fresco paintings and the construction, this church was built in the 11th century. Our investigations are not concerned with the architectural form nor with the history of the church. Our concern here is with the problem of the deterioration of the fresco paintings and with finding new methods for their conservation. It is not known when the fresco paintings started deteriorating, only that the process must have begun a long time ago. According to Archimandrite Gerasim, who later became Bishop of Strumica, the monastery was in ruins in 1896, but it could still have been renovated at small cost because all its walls were intact. Since then, many scientists have visited the monastery, but nothing was done towards the conservation of the important paintings until 1954. In that year, the Republican Commission for the Conservation of Cultural Works undertook the project of conserving the church. Some temporary conservation work was carried out at that time, and a roof-type construction was erected, supported by wooden pillars. Attempts to conserve the paintings began in 1958. According to the notes made for the commission by eminent experts in 1958, the dismantling of the frescoes and their transfer to a museum was accepted as the only way of conserving the paintings. That same year, the dismantling of the fresco paintings began under the direction of the art historian Dimitar Kionakov. Important works were discovered on the walls and were saved. In this period, the painter and conservationist Blažić, together with Trajkovsky, other experts and assistants from outside the commission, dismantled the fragments which were in better condition. Some of them were left in situ to show that the church had been frescoed. During the dismantling of a part of the frescoes, only preserved in fragments, a large amount of capillary humidity appeared, which had a detrimental effect on the dismantling process. Dismantling of paintings under great humidity at that time was an insoluble problem, and therefore the wet fragments were left. Among them, the fresco of Saint Panteleimon, preserved only in fragments. After a few more years of exposure to weather conditions, oscillations in temperature, and the great capillary humidity in the walls, some fragments of the frescoes were destroyed. New projects for the conservation of the remaining frescoes and new research began in 1974. The first attempts to conserve the frescoes by dismantling them in the classic manner did not prove successful. Then a new method was developed for dismantling frescoes from surfaces with great capillary humidity. Working with new technological knowledge, a method was conceived which yielded positive results in trial dismantling attempts. Work on the new method and the formula were based on the technological examination and analysis of the mortar, the paint, the cohesive power of the ground paint, the measurement of the wall humidity, and the external weather influences. It was necessary to find a material which could penetrate the wall and strengthen the paint, a material which could not be influenced by the humidity and which could solidify the mortar and prevent damage to the frescoes. The first layer of the mortar which fills the cracks. The first layer of the fresco mortar. The second layer of the fresco mortar where the painting is. On this mortar, the fresco has been painted. After this application on the canvas, we dismantle the fresco painting together with the 3 layers of mortars. The back is worked on, and only the second layer of mortar is left. The first attempts were made on little fragments which did not have paint on them. Among the first attempts at dismantling according to the new method and formula is the fragment being prepared here for dismantling. The basic and most dangerous enemy is the capillary humidity coming from within the walls. The dismantling is being carried out in October, when the mountain tops are covered with snow. It is raining when work begins. First, a reading of the wall humidity is taken. High humidity is registered. It varies according to the structure of the wall and the building technique. If the mortar has just been slapped on over the stone in dense molecules, the humidity is less. If the stone is more porous and can absorb greater quantities of moisture, the humidity is greater. The fixing of the wall is achieved with basic acrylate, which does not damage the paint or the mortar and has the aim of penetrating the pores of the mortar and the paint as deeply as possible and fixing them. This also prevents the penetration of the capillary water, which rises from the wall to the surface of the frescoes. The lessening of the humidity is the main precondition, and it is checked after each operation. The making of the glue is also different from the classic method, which involved applying the glue hot to the frescoes. The new glue is applied warm and can be handled slowly and carefully, as it allows time for correction. After the fixing process, glue is put over the frescoes. They are covered with gauze, glue is applied again, and the canvas is pressed with a brush so that it sticks to the wall surface better. The drying process of the canvas is registered on a humidity meter, which will show a decline in the degree of humidity. When the canvas is dry, another layer of gauze is applied with the same glue. The gauze is applied in 2 or more layers, depending on the size of the fresco. When the humidity meter shows that the second canvas is also considerably drier, the process of removing the mortar from the wall is begun. This is done with the use of a hammer wrapped in cotton wool and gauze. The strokes should be as soft as possible, just enough to set up vibrations in the mortar. When the whole surface has been freed from the wall, the frescoes, together with the mortar, are put onto a board. The back is levelled to an even height, so that the cracked surface of the frescoes is not damaged. Then the fixing and puttying of the holes and cracks is begun, with casein cement and PVA, which fixes the canvas to the mortar. Another canvas is applied and the fragment is turned onto its front when it dries. The freeing of the canvas from the frescoes is done with distilled water. After the safe and successful trial dismantling, dismantling of the rest of the frescoes, which were only discovered recently, is begun. The composition which is being prepared for dismantling was recently discovered by Dr. Peter Milkovich Pepek. It depicts the sacrifice of Joachim and Anna. Before dismantling of frescoes, where the painted layer has been preserved, they are documented with photographs and drawings on graph paper on a scale of 1 to 2.5, on which the damage in the paint and the mortar are marked in different colours. The degree of humidity from before the beginning of work up to the end are also recorded on this drawing. After this, the painted layers of the frescoes are fixed. After touching the frescoes with cotton wool, it was decided that the paint was not stable. The frescoes were fixed with basic acrylate diluted in alcohol. Its neutrality is checked on an indicator. After having strengthened the painted layers, the frescoes are copied onto tracing paper, size 1:1. The technical and photographic documentation is indispensable during complex operations, especially during the separation of the frescoes from the wall. The wall humidity is checked again and systematically written down on the previously prepared drawing. The first canvas is stuck over the entire surface of the frescoes. The glue has been made with a basis of polyvinyl alcohol, acrylate, gelatin and other constituents which together have the effect of gluing the painted mortar surface until its re-exposure after the fresco's conservation. After a careful check of the percentage of humidity and the degree of the drying of the canvas, the second and then the third canvas are applied. The drying of the glue is hindered by the large percentage of humidity in the air. Information is obtained from the Strumica meteorological station. After the surface humidity has declined to between 10 and 15 degrees, separation of the fresco mortar from the wall is begun. The surface of the canvas is softly struck with a padded hammer, and the vibrations make the mortar and the frescoes start coming off the wall. When it is certain that the mortar is loose, a board covered with felt and cellulose cotton wool is leaned against the wall. The board has been shaped to the dimensions of the wall. It serves to catch the frescoes. After freeing the fresco mortar from the wall, the most complicated part of this operation is begun, namely knocking a chisel into the free space between the mortar and the wall. The deep surfaces are separated with the use of a spear. In this way, 17 fragments of the frescoes are dismantled. The places where the paint has been applied over the surface of the stone are a special problem, particularly if they are in the middle of a fragment. In these places, the stone is cut with chisels and spears. The mortar is quite thick, and bricks and big stones are extracted with it. The preparation of the back of the frescoes is a very complex problem. It has to be done slowly, carefully, and with great patience. The back is treated with a scalpel, chisel, dental utensils, and other tools with which the mortar is ground to an even level. The medieval painter used a double layer of mortar. The first layer is rough and contains a large quantity of sand and stones. It fills in the cracks and levels the surface of the wall. The second layer, which receives the paintings, contains weeds, a little sand, brick, and other constituents, as well as a large quantity of lime. This base for the painting contains about 70% of lime. The first layer is very hard and difficult to remove, and the second is softer and easy to work on. After the mortar has been levelled to the desired thickness, the fresco mortar is fixed with milk. The little cracks The little cracks made during the preparation of the mortar are putted, and the mortar is fixed with 3% paraloid so that it acquires greater cohesiveness. The back is strengthened with gauze and glue with a casein and polyvinyl acetate base. The frescoes are turned to the front for treatment. The canvas is separated from the original frescoes with the distilled water. In earlier methods, this was done with hot water. This was meant to melt the glue, but it inevitably caused damage. With the new method, the dismantling of the canvas is rendered safe. The water loosens the glue, while the painted layers and the mortar remain undamaged. The prepared frescoes will be exhibited on iron frames made according to the form and kind of the frescoes. The frame is covered with lead netting. The surface of the frame is filled in with mortar, the cohesive element of which is casein and polyvinyl acetate, and the filling is made from ground stalactite and lime. Thus prepared, these frames are very light and easy to transport and exhibit. The prepared original frescoes become a part of the new frames. Retouching of the fragments will also be important. The putted areas will have the tone and the shades of the original frescoes. The treated surfaces will be a shade lighter so that they can be distinguished from the original frescoes. The differences in tones will only be apparent to the scientist. They will exist for the scientists involved in research to notice the retouchings and to enjoy the original frescoes, painted hundreds of years ago by the old master.